Hello everybody and welcome to a Java tutorial video where we can talk about program flow, iteration, control structure. So let's start with our objective. In our objectives, identify what repetition control structure is used for, identify the different types of loops such as while loop, do-while loop, and for loop, identify what an infinite loop is, and introduce the branching statement that we can use in our while loop, do-while loop, or for loop, or in our loop structures, and demonstrate the loops and the branching statements in Eclipse. So we are going to code them one by one. So let's start. When we say repetition control structure, used to make a block of code execute repeatedly, either for a set number of times or until a certain condition is met. Instead of writing the same code many times, repetition or looping makes programs shorter, cleaner, and easier to manage. So what is loop or looping? A loop is a programming feature that allows a block of code to repeat multiple times, either a fixed number of times or until a certain condition is true. So why do we use loops? It to save time, no need to copy-paste the same code over and over again with the use of loops. Fewer mistakes, easier to change one loop than many lines, and do things until finished, manipulating our code such as asking the user again and again until they give the right input. So, here's an example, a loop in Java. As you can see with our example, we are writing the same text over and over again 5 times. It is printing I love you as a text in the console. So, the question is, what if I want to create that text 100 times? That's going to be filled with printline statements in our code. Just doing that output. How do we make it easier for us programmers to write a text repeatedly with a cleaner version of code? So that's why we're going to use the different types of loops. So there are 3 types of loops. We have the while loop, do-while loop, and for loop. We're going to tackle about them each individually. So let's start with while loop. A while loop, a statement or block of statements that is repeatedly as long as some condition is satisfied. So let's take a look at our example with the while loop. So first, we initialized and declared a variable I equals to 1, right? And we created a while loop body. A while loop body contains a while keyword, a boolean expression, and body of the while loop. Let's talk about first the top of the while loops. In the top of the while loops part, there is the while keyword and the boolean expression. With the boolean expression, we can identify if the while is true. If the while is true, it will run its body. I is less than or equal to 5, meaning that if I right now is 1 is less than or equal to 5, which right now is true, then run the body of the while loop. And right now, since it is true, we're going to run its body. Inside of its body, we have the print state and the update. Since we know already about print line statements, we're going to talk about the update. Update is a very important part of a loop statements. A update can determine whether a loop needs to stop, or it tells the while loop that it should stop eventually. What's the meaning of I++? An I++ meaning incrementation or adding 1 to your value. I is equals to 2. Now 2 is less than or equal to 5. It'll check again, and in that terms, that is true, meaning it will execute the while loop body. So it will run the system prints the print statement, and it will proceed to the update. Your 2 becomes 3, and it'll check in your boolean expression whether that's still true or false. 3 is less than or equal to 5 is true. So therefore, it'll run the code again. It'll update, it'll go back to the boolean expression, but this time it's 4. 4 is less than or equal to 5. That is still true. It'll still go execute the body of the while loop. It will update, and it will go back to the boolean expression. Now, it is 5. 5 is less than or equal to 5. That is still true, because we have a sign of equal. The while loop body will execute and it'll update again. and this time is going to be 6. When we check the Boolean expression again, 6 is less than or equal to 5 is false. So therefore, in that part or in that moment, it will terminate. The while loop will stop and it will proceed to the bottom of your code. The question is, since the update, as I said, is a very important part of a loop structure, what if your update will be missing in your while loop? What would happen? I declared and initialized my variable I to 1. I wrote a while statement with a Boolean expression I is less than or equal to 5. Since the condition is true, the scope of my while loop will be executed. That's the first iteration of my loop. Just a bit clarification, for example, in this while loop, if the body of the while loop runs, that's called an iteration. Since it is the first time of my while loop runs, so therefore the first execution of my body of the while loop is called first iteration. Now if it updates again and it's still true in the Boolean expression and it runs your body of while loop, that's called second iteration. Gets? So it will write the text, but my variable I will not change its value. It will stay at 1. Since my variable value will not change, my while loop Boolean expression will never be false. So my while loop will have an infinite loop. So therefore, in this while loop, there will be no ending. So it will just print infinitely amount of I love you in our console. Let's go ahead and try while loop and see how it actually works in real code. Okay, so here's an example of a while loop problem. Write a Java program that asks the user to enter numbers. Keep asking the user until the user enters 0. When 0 is entered, and display the sum of all numbers entered. So let's try and do this in our code. Here I am in Eclipse. You can pretty much use any IDE you want in Java programming. You can use NetBeans, you can use Eclipse, you can use Visual Studio Code, you can use Notepad if you want. But we're going to use Eclipse for now, and we're going to try to solve the while loop problem. So since our user needs to enter an input number, so therefore I'm going to use a scanner. So I'm going to say scanner. I'm going to call my object S with a new scanner. Let's import. We have already imported and we have a scanner ready. Let's go ahead and create some variables with storing the user input and the total of all the numbers. So int num, let's say num user equals 0. So for now, we are going to declare, initialize our user input as 0. We're also going to create a total to store everything that the user inputs. And since this is a while loop problem, so therefore we're going to use a while loop. So it says there that while num user, since we're telling our program that when the user hits 0, the program should stop. Therefore, if num user is not equal to 0, then keep running this code. Then what I'm going to do is add a total here. So I'm going to update the total, the value of our total variable. We're going to say equals total plus num user. I can't spell. So we can pretty much make a shortcut way of doing this by simply, oh no, not plus, plus, there you go. We can have a shortcut of this statement. So we can just write this. You can just say plus or equal num user. That's pretty much the same. You can use either both of those, but we're just going to use the shortcut ones. And then we'll write sys out, and we're going to say add a number. And then we're going to say an instruction input 0 to end the program. I'm not going to say print line because I don't want my cursor to go next line. And then we're going to call our num user equals to s dot next int. There you go. and a missing part. We need to add another sys out here. Basically, just gonna copy this. This is pretty much the same. Num user equals x dot next int. And there you go. Okay, and then next, if the while loop stop, we need to output all of the sum of all numbers that the user inputted. So we're gonna put a print line statement telling total sum, or sum of all numbers, to say sum of all numbers. Then we're gonna concatenate total. So we're telling the total of all the input numbers of the user. So let's go ahead and try and debug if there's an error. So it says there add a number. So I'm going to input 5 plus 10. And then let's say like 15. So what? That's 5, 15, that's 30. I'm gonna add another 30, so therefore that should be 60. Then I'm gonna print, I'm going to input 0. So there you go. It says there sum of all numbers is 60. Now, here's a challenge for you guys. Create a same like this, but with different arithmetic operations, such as subtraction, multiplication, division, and so forth. And test everything. Break your program pretty much so you can learn fast. And that is the first activity, or the while loop. Let's go ahead and proceed to the do while loop. We're back with our presentation. We are going to proceed to the next type of loop, which is do while loop. Okay, so next up we have the do while loop. So do while loop is pretty much the same as while loop, but with a different structure. So as you can see, it started first with the keyword do and has a body of the do while loop. So inside of the do while loop, it is the print line statement and the update. After the body of the do while loop, it will go to the Boolean expression, which besides it is the keyword while. Now, inside of the Boolean expression of the do while loop, I is less than or equal to 5. So meaning 1 is less than or equal to 5. That is true. Now, it will go back scope of the do, and then it'll iterate or execute the body. Then it'll go back to the Boolean expression, and now it is 3 because 2 plus 1 is 3. We incremented it because of the I++. So now we're going to check, is 3 less than or equal to 5? That is still true. So therefore, it is going to go back in the do while body. And we're going to execute each line in the do while body. It'll update, and then it'll go back with the Boolean expression. So in this time, it is 4. 4 is less than or equal to 5. That is still true. So therefore, it'll go back to the body of the do while loop, execute each line, and then updates. After it updates, it is now 5 because 4 plus 1 is 5. We incremented it to 1. It'll go back to the Boolean expression. I is less than or equal to 5. And right now that is 5, and that is still true because there is an sign of equal. It'll go back to the do while loop body, execute, and update, and this time it will have a value of 6. And if we check the Boolean expression, 6 is less than or equal to 5, which is false. So therefore, it will terminate the do while loop. The difference is that instead of the while or the Boolean expression is on the top, it is on the bottom. And do while loop has an extra syntax. So you can see in the end, it is very important that there is a semicolon in the end of a do while loop. So let's talk about more on what is the difference between a do while loop and a while loop. So let's have this kind of example where we start in our variable I is equals to 6. So usually we have the variable I is equals to 1. The do while loop will execute. So therefore, it'll write the system.out.print line or the print statement and then execute the update. That means do while loop will have its first iteration. Now, it will check the Boolean expression of the do while loop. I is less than or equal to 5. Since we updated the value of the variable I to 6 plus 1, which is 7. So therefore, the Boolean expression is false. Now, what does that mean? That means the do while loop will already terminate, but it runs once, or it has a first iteration. So, how about with while loop? Well, with while loop, it has a different case because while loop has a Boolean expression in the top instead in the bottom. So therefore, while loop checks the condition first before it executes, rather than a do while loop runs first and then check the condition. So as you can see with this example where we declared and initialized variable I equals to 6, it will check the condition of the while loop. 6 is less than or equal to 5. That is false. So therefore, this while loop will never run because it already has a false Boolean expression. So there will be no iteration. See the difference now? When it comes, or the difference between a do while loop and a while loop is that do while loop execute then check the condition, while with the while loop it check the condition and then execute. So if we have this type of code, that means the do while loop will have one iteration or their first iteration. Meanwhile, with the while loop, it will have no iteration because it already checks if the condition is true. So, since we've talked about do while loop, let's try and test it in the real code with Eclipse. Okay, so we're back with our question problems, but this time we're going to answer a do while loop problem. So, here's the question. Write a Java program that asks the user to guess a number between 1 and 5. The program keeps asking until the correct number is guessed. Show correct when they guess it or they guess the number. So let's go ahead and try this to see how it actually works. So we're back with the Eclipse and I've already created a project and a class. So I hope you can do that, but if you can, check out my previous video with talking about Java programming basics, and I've taught you in that video how to create a project and overall class and pretty much everything to set up a Java program in Eclipse. Enough with that. Let's start with the activity. So we're going to use a do while loop statement and we're trying to let the user guess a number between 1 and 5, and then when the user correctly guess the number, and then it will say correct. Since we're taking a user input, so therefore we're going to use again the scanner class. So we have the scanner, we're going to call it S again, equals new scanner with a parameter system.in import. Just move your cursor to the word where it is having an error. Okay, choose the first option. Now you have a scanner object. So we're going to create a variable where this is the container of the user input 0. I forgot to put the int keyword, and there you go. So we're going to use a do while loop statement, and we're going to write while with a semicolon. Don't forget about the semicolon. I'm going to try to make the user guess the number 4. Okay, so what I'm going to try here is while num_user is not equal to 4. So what I'm saying here is if the num_user is not equal to 4, then go back with your body of the do while loop. Okay, so as long as the user does not guess correctly, the do while loop will just keep looping until the user get the correct answer. So I'm going to put a sysout telling an instruction to the user. So I'm going to say guess a number between 1 to 5. I'm going to remove the ln so that our cursor does not go to the next line. I'm going to call the scanner object, and I'm going to use the num_user as the container of our input. Next int, since we're getting an integer, we're going to call the method of the scanner object, and that's pretty much it. Let's try to run this code. So guess between 1 and 5, guess between 1 and 5. 3, 4. But as you can see, it doesn't have any output because we didn't put a print line statement or a message for the user to know if they got the right answer. Oh, what am I writing? This out. So I'm gonna say correct. Then I'm going to also output the user input. So correct. So basically what I'm telling there is correct number 4 or correct 4 concatenate is, let's add a space, is the correct. There you go. Let's try it again. Let's run. So 1, 2, 3. So as you can see, it keeps looping 5, and if I write 4, it'll say correct. 4 is the correct answer. Let's make it more user-friendly by saying or messaging the user that they should know that their output is wrong. Out. There you go. And I'm gonna say if Boolean expression. Okay, I'm gonna put this as the alt. And I'm gonna say in a Boolean expression, if num user enters that is not equal to 4, print this message saying incorrect number. Please try again. Dot. So let's try to output this. So guess a number between 1 to 5. Let's say 1. It's gonna say incorrect number. Please try again. So guess a number between 1 and 5. 2. Incorrect number. 3. No. 5. No. I'm gonna try 4. And there you go. Correct. 4 is the correct number. So this is just an example on how to use the do-while loop. So again, the difference between a while loop and a do-while loop is that the do-while loop is execute, then check the condition. But with while loop, it checks the condition first and then runs the iteration. Now that we have tackled the do-while loop and the while loop, let's go proceed to the last type of loop, which is the for loop. So let's go back in our presentation. Last but not least in the types of our loop, it's called for loop. So again, 3 types of loops are while loop, do-while loop, and for loop. This time, we're going to talk about for loop. A for loop has 3 parts. There is the initialization expression, the loop condition, is the step expression. So as you can see with the for loop, inside of their parentheses have more stuff in it compared to while loop and do while loop. Do while and while loop, there's only the loop condition or the Boolean expression, right? But this time, for loop can have 3 parts. So let's talk about them one by one. So first part of our for loop is called the initialization expression. The initialization expression is the part where your variable on what we're going to use in our loop is declared and initialized in that part. So usually with while loop and do while loop, the variable I is outside of the loop, right? But this time with for loop, the int I or the I variable is inside of our for loop. The next part of for loop is the loop condition. Basically, this is the Boolean expression of where it checks. If it's true, then it will have an iteration. It is pretty much the same with the while Boolean expression and the do while Boolean expression. But this time, it has 3 parts and including that loop condition. Next is the update or the step expression we're talking about earlier. But this time with for loop, step expression is inside of the parentheses. Let's deep more further into for loop structure. Okay? So let's compare the for loop and the while loop for better understanding the for loop. So here's the same code but with the different loop structure. Okay? So these 2 code have the same purpose. Basically, it tells the program to write a text 5 times, but the while loop has a different way of creating the 3 parts of the for loop. So as you can see, talk about in the while loop that the variable that is going to be used inside of your while loop is initialized and declared outside, while with the for loop, it can be declared inside itself. And also, with the update or the step expression in the while loop, it is inside of the body. But with the for loop, it is inside of the three parts of its for loop. So let's talk about more in the initialization expression part of for loop. As we talked about earlier, a variable can be declared initialized inside of the for loop itself, such as in this example, where the int f equals 1 is created inside of the for loop. But here's a problem, okay? Since we declared and initialized that variable f inside of that for loop, so that means the for loop can the only one that can access the f variable. So if we try to output it or use it in a different parts of the code, it will give us an error if we try to use the f variable, because it is purposely for the for loop itself. But what about this one? While we declared a variable I outside of the for loop and we give a value inside of the for loop. In this case, we can use the variable in the different parts of the code. So as you can see, it does not give me any error because the declaration of variable I is outside of the for loop, which means it can be accessed anywhere of the code. Now here's another example that is very close to while loop structure, where we declare and initialize our variable outside of the for loop. But in order to use this with for loop, we can just make the first part of the for loop empty, leaving only the semicolon part, which declaring or telling our program that it is a separation of the variable and the loop condition. This is also the same with previous initialization expression, where the variable I is declared, but this time it is declared and initialized, meaning initialized is giving a value to a variable. So that means this variable I can be accessed anywhere in the code. We have been talking about infinite loop this time. What about the infinite loop of a for loop? If we leave everything or the three parts of the for loop empty, that means it will run infinitely. So just thinking about it, that the loop condition has no restriction. So therefore, this for loop will just run infinitely because there is no restriction or there is no border line. Where do we stop the for loop? It's also the same with this type of for loop, where we put a keyword true, but infinite loops can be used depends on the program. So sometimes infinite loop is good, but we should know how to stop them eventually. So therefore, we're going to talk about more stuff on how to deal with infinite loops. This is another example of an infinite for loop, where this time, again, as I said, update is very important when it comes to loop. But with the first example, there is a missing part, which is the step expression, meaning that the I would always stay in 1. So therefore, the loop condition will always be true because 1 is less than and equal to 5 all the time because there is no update. So this is another example of a infinite for loop. And what about this one? So as you can see, we have declared a variable I equals to 10, and we're telling our program that the loop condition of this for loop is I is greater than or equal to 5, meaning that 10 is greater than or equal to 5, which is true. But if we check the update or the step expression, it will add a value to the variable I, meaning that the next update will make the variable I equals to 11. So that means this condition would never be false because the variable I would never have a decreasing value that will make the loop condition false. So this is another example of an infinite loop. So let's go ahead and try loop or for loop in Eclipse and see how it actually works. So this is an example of a for loop problem. So write a Java program that prints a multiplication table of 5 from 1 times 5 up to 10 times 5. Let's go ahead and proceed to Eclipse and show this how it works. Okay, so since we don't really need a user input, so we're just gonna write the for loop quickly in our program. So let's write for with the curly braces, and we're going to put a variable in our for loop, so int I equals 1. And since we want to 1 times 5, so we're gonna write 1 is less than or equal to 10. Then we're gonna put I plus plus there. So next we're going to write each expression, so arithmetic expression, and then we're gonna put the equal and then the value. So an example is I plus times, so that signifies this is a multiplication, times 5, concatenate equals, then we're gonna put the value, which is I times 5. There you go. So if we run this, let's try to run it, and it gives me this. Oh wait, okay, alright, just give me a problem there. There you go. So that's it. That's how easy to create a multiplication table inside of a for loop. So as you can see, it starts with 1 times 5 up to 6 to 10 times 5. So let's make it more user friendly by creating a scanner. So this time, instead of making it stop to only 10, so 1 times 5 to up to 10 times 5, I will let the user make a restriction on where to stop. New scanner system dot in, not out. Next, we're gonna let the user input a number. So where do you want to stop the multiplication table? We're gonna put a scanner with a variable int num user equals to s, that makes int, meaning we're getting a integer value. So instead of 10, we're gonna put num user. There you go. So let's try it out. So let's say 1. So 1 times 5, let's try to 100. So have 100 times 5 up to 1 times 5. So there you go. So that's how you use for loop as an example. Again, just a friendly reminder that you should try more on the loops that we are using and try to break it and explore on what these statements can do. And we're going to proceed to the branching statement, which can give you more complex structure when it comes to your loops. So let's go ahead and get into our presentation. So we're back with our presentation, and this time we're going to talk about branching statement, which is the break and continue in Java. So this is a continuation with the iteration control structure, where we're going to use break and continue keywords in our loops. So let's get started. So a break and continue keywords, these are special keywords that are used within loops. Break, it breaks or terminates the loop and transfer the control outside the loop, while the continue skips the current execution and passes the control to the start of the loop. So just remember that when we say break, it skips the whole loop, while with the continue, it skips an iteration of loop. So here's an example of a break keyword. As for this example, we have created a for loop. So as you can see, with the 3 parts of the for loop, that means this loop will run 10 times, right? Because of its condition and the I variable. Upper part of the for loop, which is the if I equals to 5, meaning that if I became 5 at some point, you will have to write the printline statement saying 5 is the last number of the loop, and then it breaks. Meaning, if we say break, it will terminate the whole loop. So what we're saying here with this for loop and this if statement is that when the variable I became 5 at some point of the iteration of for loop, you should terminate the loop and does not continue with the 6th iteration, meaning that in the 5th iteration, it will stop. Okay, so basically, we said break is the terminating the whole loop. Okay, while with the example with continue keywords of our for loop, so we created a for loop that should run 10 times because of its loop condition and the variable I. In the upper part of our for loop body, there is an if statement checking if I has a odd number. So when an odd number appears in the for loop iteration, they should create a continue, meaning that this iteration skip and proceed to the next iteration. So what we're doing here initially is that we prevent our code to write a odd numbers and just the even numbers. And meaning the continue keyword is that it skips an iteration, so it doesn't proceed to the next line of code. So before we end this video, I want to show you a little bit of the examples of the break keywords and continue keywords used in Java programming. So let's go ahead and proceed to that examples. So going back with our program, so I'm going to write a for loop. Okay, now I want to put every let's say for example all the even numbers just like we did in the example. So I'm going to write I is modulo, so modulo basically remaining 2. So if we divide I to 2, they should not be equal to 0. So what we're telling in our program is that we should check if the variable I value has a number or an even number, and if there is an odd number, we're going to say continue, meaning that we are going to skip every odd numbers in the iteration, and I'm going to print every even numbers. Okay, so if we print this, as you can see, it all just prints every even number. So there are 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. But let's say for example I want to stop eventually in, say for example, in 6, right? I want to stop in 6, but I still want to print out the 6th number, right? So I don't want to proceed to the 8. So I'm going to say I is equal to 8, then you should break. And I'm going to add just a message before the loop ends that thank you for watching. So what's gonna happen is that the for loop will run the iteration to 1 to 10, but it will be controlled with the continue and break keywords with our condition statements. So with our for loop, it'll check if there is an odd number and even number. If it's an odd number, it will be skipped. And then once the value of variable I becomes 8, it will stop, and then there it will terminate the whole for loop. So let's check it out. So as you can see, 2 are even numbers, 4 are even numbers, 6 are even numbers, and then it ends with thank you for watching. And that's pretty much it with our lesson in this. So we talk about iteration control structure, we talk about different types of loops, and we tackled on branching statements such as continue and keywords. So I hope you've learned something in this video, and to be more good at programming, make sure to always practice and always break things when it comes to your code so that you learn to debug. So I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.